Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Intro to CompTIA Security Plus, presented by our amazing expert technical instructor at New Horizons, Scott Rake. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the session. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our dedicated Q&A after the presentation is over. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Scott.
There we go. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. So today, I'm just going to give a fairly brief overview of what the CompTIA Security Plus course and what the CompTIA Security Plus certification really means and what it brings to the party, that sort of thing. I will try my best to keep myself short, sweet, and to the point so that we can be as efficient with everybody's time as possible. That's a bit of a challenge for me. I tend to be a little long-winded, a little chatty if I'm not careful. So I'll try and rein that aspect of my personality in just a smidge. That being said, CompTIA Security Plus is, I don't think it's ever been more relevant than it is right now, to be honest, with the breakneck pace at which technology evolves. And with each evolution, new threats, new vulnerabilities emerge, and there are always going to be new threat actors looking to take advantage of those emerging threats and vulnerabilities. So having some sort of foundational knowledge and how to minimize our risk becomes an incredibly important skill set for us to bring to bear, just in our, not just in our professional lives, but in our day-to-day lives as well. And so the purpose of this CompTIA Security Plus exam or certification is really to demonstrate that we have that foundational knowledge that's required for us to be able to perform those core security functions. And it can demonstrate that, again, foundational skills that can help you take those first steps in a security specialty within IT. So it can be very essential for anyone looking to advance their career in the security field. Depending on the nature of your organization and depending on the industry you operate in, it might even be mandatory. So there's a big need for this, not just from a practical sense, but from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective as well. Because this is a valid way, a globally recognized method of vouching for the fact that you have the requisite skills in the security space. And so it's not really you saying, trust me, I know how to apply cybersecurity principles in the real world. It's CompTIA saying, we have validated that this person has this foundational skill set that you can build on. Now, so not only does it validate those skills, it helps you demonstrate a certain level of competency, and through that can open doors and enhance your ability to advance your career. But it is, I feel, I know I've said this word a lot, it's foundational. All right, so it provides that foundation for us to build on later. And that's something that is pretty, I don't want to say traditional necessarily, but representative of a lot of the CompTIA certifications is they provide you with the necessary foundation for people like myself to build off of. Like, I got all my CompTIA certifications years ago, and it made my areas of specialty easier to obtain because I started that pursuit with a better understanding from the jump, that sort of thing. So when it comes to like security and network architecture, network engineering, getting the CompTIA Net Plus and Security Plus exams under my belt and getting that certification helped me, number one, just within myself, recognize where my interests were. So I just found myself being kind of pulled more in the security and the networking direction than the hardware aspects of like the A plus. And so I kind of understood at that point that these two areas are where my interest already aligned. And the fact that I was able to understand these concepts at a level that got me into the Security Plus and Net Plus certs made it a little bit easier for me to take the next step and get the next higher levels of certifications and to understand the more technically challenging ingredients. So when we talk about this as a foundational skill set, we're we're talking about taking we're going to be evaluating a large cross section of, in this case, the techniques, the tech TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we need to be comfortable with to help reduce our risk of a security incident from taking place. And so it helps us validate that we have that foundational skill set and we can leverage those skills to create an environment that gives us the risk profile that we're more comfortable with, right? Helping us maintain a strong security posture and protect our information. Now, the way CompTIA has evolved their certifications also ensures that we're able to stay current. Because back before like 2011, if you got a CompTIA certification, it was considered a lifetime certification, which is fantastic and attractive for all the folks who got their certification years ago. But there's no real easy way for us to validate that their skill set is even remotely current. I have friends who got their A plus, their Net plus, and their Security plus back in the early 2000s, and they haven't really demonstrated at least the A plus, Sec plus, and Net plus certifications from back then don't really give us a way to validate that you've maintained a current skill set. With CompTIA, as it is now, from 2011 moving forward, when you get a certification, it's valid for a period of like 3 years. And you don't have to recertify every 3 years. You can maintain continuing education credits as a way to demonstrate to CompTIA that you've continued to stay current. And if you jump through all their hoops and you satisfy their continuing education credit requirements, then it automatically sort of renews your certification moving forward. So you can effectively end up with a lifetime certification, but in a way that allows you to sort of validate that you're keeping your skill sets current. And in doing so, it increases the credibility and trust that we can have when we present this as sort of proof that we have that foundational skill set. Because it's not going to be foundational skills from 25 years ago that are being validated. It is something that's demonstrably more current. Now, the key concepts, like we said, we take a wide cross section of all of the security issues that we're going to be likely to have to address. So all the various different types of threats, vulnerabilities, and attack vectors that threat actors might use to try and exploit those vulnerabilities. A variety of different tools and technologies that we're going to lean into to make life a little bit easier for us as cybersecurity professionals. We'll talk about fundamentally secure architectural elements and design elements. So just fundamentally, there has been a shift in the last like 5 or 10 years, moving away from a traditional trust model to something a little bit more robust. And what I mean by that is in a traditional business environment from something like, say, Active Directory, we have a single sign-on environment. When we become members of the directory, there's an automatic trust relationship that is established between us and other members of the directory. It's called, for anybody that's curious, it's called a transitive two-way trust relationship. And the idea is it makes it really convenient for us as users in a directory, in a domain, to have access to all of our resources. But that trust relationship can also be treated as a weakness or a vulnerability that can be exploited. And so a more modern design and architecture is now something called zero trust, where we can still be given access to all the same resources, but we constantly have to prove that we have a legitimate need to access those resources. We don't take it for granted that just because you're presenting your username and password, that automatically means you are who you claim to be, and therefore I can give you access to confidential information. We want to now implement a little bit more of a verify first, trust later type of approach. And so that these updates and these changes in architecture and design will have an impact on traditional processes like identity and access management. How are we going to present ourselves as somebody that we can trust? And how are we going to validate that they are who they claim to be? Based off of that, we can then provide people with permissions to access resources that they need to do their job. We'll talk about risk management, and we'll talk about cryptography and public key infrastructure. Now, this is one of those areas of expertise, one of those specialty areas that you might find yourself really interested in, because the Security Plus course will introduce you to these concepts. But public key infrastructure and cryptography in and of itself is sort of its own specialty. So if you find yourself really interested in these concepts, there's still a lot of topsoil left. They're still going to have to, what we get into at Security Plus isn't enough to define you as a subject matter expert in this area, but it is enough to make sure that you understand what happens when we apply these concepts and that you can work with those concepts effectively. Even though we won't get into it at a level of detail where people may feel a certain degree of expertise, you will feel a lot more comfortable. And at the end of the day, even if you're just talking about from a personal perspective, you'll understand a lot more specifically what happens whenever you navigate to the Amazon website and you start, shopping around for products that you want to purchase and have delivered to your home. You'll understand a lot more specifically how we're able to do those things and still be, relatively safe. So those are just some of the areas that we get into. We also get into operational security or OPSEC. We get into sort of the day-to-day activities that we might want to think about that can help us achieve a better security posture. So it's not all 100% steeped in the technology. There's a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff that we will talk about as well. But again, once you get past the exam and you gain that certification, it is CompTIA vouching for your knowledge and your skill set. And they are a globally recognized entity. And their sort of stamp of approval carries a heck of a lot more weight than mine does. And so that's why having that certification can be really useful for advancing your career. And given the nature of the way technology evolves and the rate of change and how change is accelerating, the volatile nature of the world that we live in, security is always going to be in high demand. Partly for the practical aspects we were talking about, but also just to keep ourselves compliant. Again, depending on your industry, if you work in healthcare, right, then there are legislative requirements that we have to be compliant with in order to do business. If we work in banking or the financial industry, we have different compliance requirements that we have to work within. And so having this certification demonstrates how, at least our understanding of the importance of being able to work within whatever type of box we might be operating in, right? Financial industry, we've got a series of constraints that define what we're allowed to do and how we understand, how we know when we might have inadvertently crossed the line. Similarly for healthcare, federal, government organizations, whether it's federal, state, or local, we're all going to have different constraints that we have to work within. From a security perspective, the Security Plus credential helps us demonstrate that we are aware of that necessity. We may not be, because obviously Security Plus is very broad, so it's not going to be targeted against specifically things like healthcare industries. So we won't get into the specific requirements for those specific industries, but we will talk about the necessity for understanding the requirements of the industry we work within, and then leverage these skills to help us make sure that we're able to do our work the right way, that we're coloring inside the lines, so to speak. Now, when you sign up for one of our courses, we're not just going to throw you to the wolves. All right. You're not going to be just subjected to some dude like me who's going to talk for the entire day about security. You're going to be, of course, you will be listening to somebody like me giving facilitating the discussion, but you're going to be given all the materials you need for success. So you'll have all of your, what we would just call courseware, the book, access to labs, so you can have sort of the hands on the keyboard moment that can help you take it out of the academic perspective and apply it in a more real world sort of way. You'll also have quizzes that can help you focus on studying and validating your understanding of very specific sections of the material, all the way up to full-on practice tests that can help you basically judge just how ready you are for the exam. Now, the exam itself, there's no real prerequisite in terms of time in the industry or experience or really even other certifications that you have to have before you can sit this one. That being said, I would recommend some measure of experience in working in the IT world, before you come and take this class, because some of the concepts are a little easier to wrap your head around if you've got some basic IT experience coming in. But technically speaking, it's not required. If you come in cold, if say like my brother decided today that he wanted to take this class, he's not an IT person. I don't know that my brother has ever willingly touched a computer in his life, um, at least not by his own accord. But if he somehow woke up and decided that that's what he wanted to do, he could take this class and he could study and he would be able to eventually pass the exam. He's just probably going to have to work a little bit harder to understand some of these concepts. So there is no prereq necessarily, but some foundational knowledge can be useful to kind of flatten the learning curve down just a little bit to make it a bit more achievable in a shorter amount of time. Now, the exam format itself is a little interesting. You're going to have it's going to be a combination of multiple choice types of questions with some performance-based questions in there. You might run into a series of matching questions as well. The performance-based questions are going to be small little simulations that expect you to be able to at least do part of the work that they're asking you to perform, as a way to demonstrate that you have a little bit more than just academic knowledge, that you have some hands-on experience that you're able to communicate and demonstrate for them. Those performance-based questions will generally represent a minority of the types of questions you're going to get. The vast majority of your questions are going to be multiple choice. Now, the number of questions you get, it'll be a maximum of 90. So if we have 10 people taking an exam, each person could technically get an exam with a different number of test questions. And their grading scale is weighted based on how many test questions you actually received for your exam. The time frame, regardless of whether I get 70 questions on my exam or 90 questions on my exam, you're allotted 90 minutes to answer all of your questions. Um, and so one of the tips that I would have for success is to, when you're practicing, whether you're going through one of the quizzes that we offer or you're taking the full on practice exam, is to put yourself on a clock, to get yourself sort of used to having to negotiate these exam questions under some sort of time constraint. There's something weird that can happen in our brains whenever we sit down to take an exam and we see that clock start to count down. That can add a lot of pressure and encourage us to rush. And rushing through questions, especially something like Security Plus, if you're rushing to read through it, and so you're more skimming than you are reading it critically, that's where a lot of mistakes occur. And so if we can acclimate ourselves to being able to answer these types of questions with a clock, under a time constraint, we can sort of lessen the likelihood that mistakes are going to happen simply because the clock is there and encouraging us to rush. The other thing that I encourage people to do when it comes to prepping for this is to not think about having to study the entire book and instead focus on specific areas. So you kind of break it down into smaller, more easily manageable sections. Because if you're thinking about, I have to learn this entire book at a level that would allow me to pass the exam, that can feel a little bit like Sisyphus having to roll the boulder up the hill for eternity. It can feel insurmountable in some ways. But if I say, well, I don't have to worry about the full book yet, I'm going to concentrate on the first chapter. And I'm going to ignore the other 15 chapters, and I'm just going to concentrate on making sure that I have a solid understanding of chapter 1. And then you move into the next one. And then you just sort of lather, rinse, and repeat that until you get through all the chapters, and you'll be ready to go. Now, how we decide to break it down into those smaller manageable segments, that's sort of dealer's choice. It's kind of up to us. But that's a way that you can kind of break the workload down so it doesn't feel as intense as it might be otherwise. The other tip for success that I have, and I tell this to everybody, and it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about CompTIA or we're talking about Microsoft or ITIL or DevOps or whatever the certification is that I might be going after. And chances are decent. Some of you guys, some of the folks attending this webinar might have some certifications in their hip pocket already. And I'm willing to bet that you've learned this piece of advice already. And that is, the vendor is always right. Even when they're wrong, the vendor is always right. So when you're evaluating a test question, we always want to think of it from the perspective of, what does this vendor recommend in terms of an answer to that question? Because they're not asking, what would Scott do in this circumstance? Or how would New Horizons respond to this type of vulnerability? That's not what they're asking. They have no knowledge of what I would do or what New Horizons might do. What they're asking is, are you aware of the CompTIA's Security Plus recommendation for how we would want to address this type of issue? And so I always just try to remind myself, the vendor is always right. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be taking an exam. And I'm going to have a scratch piece of paper. When I log in to take my exam, you're typically allowed a piece of note paper. The first thing I'm going to write on my note paper is, the vendor is always right. And that way I have that visual reminder to always answer these questions from the academic perspective of what the vendor is recommending versus what I might think I would want to do first instead. So that's just another, what I would consider to be a really powerful tip for success, and not just with CompTIA, but in general. Again, the types of things that are covered, things like governance, risk management, compliance, when security incidents do occur, what is the best way for us to respond to those so that we can limit the blast radius of those incidents and be able to recover and get back to a sense of normalcy with as little disruption as possible. We're going to address specifically security requirements that we might need to maintain when we're operating in a wireless infrastructure, versus if we're operating in the cloud. We'll even talk a little bit about secure application development principles and some of the security vulnerabilities we need to be aware of and ways that we can avoid introducing software vulnerabilities in our code. We'll talk about social engineering, hands down, the easiest, most prolific form of attack to occur. So we'll give a nice little discussion and understanding of all the different flavors of vanilla that social engineering might emerge. We'll talk about how we might apply security a little bit differently when it comes to virtual environments, whether those are full-on virtual machines, virtual servers, or virtualized applications through containerization. And because IoT, or Internet of Things, and mobility is a much more pronounced part of our day-to-day lives now than it has been in the past, you can expect that to be featured. I want to go as far as say prominently, but there'll be a healthy, they will feature mobility and IoT fairly healthily in the exam itself. It's not going to be a focal point of the exam, but you can count on it showing up. And we'll even get in just a smidge on forensics and something like secure application development practices or secure DevOps. And forensics, it's going to be a pretty high level overview because, again, forensics is another one of those subspecialties within the overall security domain that requires a lot of more focused type of skill sets that have to be developed. So we're going to cover what it is in a broad strokes, and you'll be tested over what digital forensics are in the same perspective, in very, very broad strokes. And similarly, when it comes to DevSecOps or secure DevOps, what are some of those secure software delivery life cycles that we need to consider? And then if you decide, and I think this is honestly one of the best things about the CompTIA entry-level exams and entry-level material, whether it's A+, Net+, or Security+, and it kind of brings us full circle to what we were talking about initially, is it can help me identify, can help an individual identify where their real interests are in the IT space. You may find there's specific attributes that we discuss and skill sets in security that are really attractive to you and something that really sort of piques your interest and triggers that intense curiosity, like forensics, for instance. And so it can uncover specific forks in the road that you might want to take to help polish and build subject matter expertise in adjacent areas. So you can get much more advanced cybersecurity certifications that specialize in areas that sort of align to what your interests are, that can directly complement other education you might have, maybe in university or something like that, or complement your existing work experience. And we already talked about how we maintain the relevancy of our certification by proving that we're able to maintain a relevant skill set through continuing education credits. Now, like I said, the really fundamental exams that you might be familiar with would be things like A+, Net+, of course, Security+. Then you have things like Server, Linux+, project management, things like even pen testing. This is sort of the entry level to what we would refer to as certified ethical hacking. Pen test is short for penetration testing, and it's sort of a sanctioned, authorized attack on our environment so that we can validate our security is as good as we need it to be. So these are all considered that sort of entry level. The ones I check marked are the ones that are probably the most popular. But if I go through some of these, I'm definitely going to start to identify, which categories, which types of material do I find really interesting versus the ones that well, we'll just say maybe a little bit less interesting. And that's going to be different for all of us. Like for me, I started out in the IT world really interested in hardware. But as my skill set kind of evolved and I started understanding more and more things, hardware became way less uh, interesting to me. Network communications became the most interesting thing first, primarily because it was the hardest for me to understand. But once I started getting to those aha moments and the light bulb started getting brighter and brighter, I got more and more interested in this. And Network Plus and Security Plus, they're quite complementary to one another. There's a lot of understanding how to perform network communications, how to perform network architect or engineering best by better understanding the security implications. So they're like opposite sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. But a lot of these are really great just to make sure that we have those entry level fundamental skills that we can build on. Plus, it can highlight which specific sort of subspecialties might be the most interesting or aligned to my interest best so that I know where I want to devote my time and energy and resources in developing beyond those foundational skills. Does that make sense? And to that end, that is the presentation. I tried to be as efficient without sacrifice. Hopefully, I didn't sacrifice too much in the way of quality, but trying to be effective and efficient to get through all of that. But does anybody have any questions or anything you'd like to toss my way that we can address?
Hey, Scott, I will go ahead and give our audience a quick minute to throw in any questions or any feedback
Sure,
or any
sure.
info. Just wanted to let everyone know that if they needed any more info on this topic, I went ahead and dropped a link in the chat to find a little bit more info on CompTIA Security, or you can go ahead and visit us at newhorizons.com. And we will absolutely be sharing this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar, just as a reminder, in case you want to come back and peep any of this info. But I think that should do it for us today, Scott.
All right.
So, alrighty,
Always a
thanks to
pleasure.
everyone. Always a pleasure to have you as well, Scott. And thanks so much to our audience for joining us today. And we'll leave you be to have an amazing week. And thanks again for all the amazing info, Scott.
Thank you.
Alrighty, bye everyone. We'll see you
Bye.
hopefully very soon in the classroom.